Profound injustice inflicts injury that is devastating and hard to heal. For communities and peoples that have experienced that kind of deep trauma, more than policy or apologies are required. With us to consider some of what that might entail, we welcome, in Kingston, Ontario, Father Raymond de Souza, chaplain of Newman House at Queen's University and a senior fellow at Cardus, that's a Canadian Christian think tank. In Fort Erie, Ontario, Jennifer Dockstader, Executive Director of the Fort Erie Native Friendship Centre. And in Midtown TO, John Moscowitz, Rabbi Emeritus at Holy Blossom Temple and the author of Evolution of an Unorthodox Rabbi, which he is. And it's great to welcome all of you to TVO tonight. Jennifer, I want to start with you because it's been 5 years since the Truth and Reconciliation Commission calls to action came out. And I want to know, in your view, whether or not you think it has led to greater justice for Indigenous peoples in this country.
Not by a long shot, unfortunately. We still have so much work to do.
Not by a long shot, you say, but can you say that the yardsticks are at least moving?
I would say that in some areas the yardsticks are moving, and I'm seeing education to young people starting to move. I think that it's going to take a long time and a couple of generations yet to actually educate everybody to the point that they understand what the injustices are.
John Moscowitz, in your view, well, let me set it up this way. You represent a people that have been through their share of historical trauma. Can a 5-year-old report with many recommendations still incomplete, can that help heal a community?
Not in the least. This is not about a 5-year-old report. This is about a recovery from trauma imposed by the government of Canada on the Indigenous nations of the country. And it will take a great deal of education, as Jennifer said, a great deal of time, recovery of a culture, and the acknowledgement, as you're suggesting, of the trauma.
Do you have a sense about, as you look through history, about how long it takes for that mission to be accomplished?
Every culture is different. Look, my people, the Jews, were in exile after the destruction of the temple for the better part of 2,000 years. We were able to sustain because learning sustained and family sustained in exile. That's not necessarily the case with First Nations. Families were separated. Education was farmed out to government schools. It's going to be much harder. There is no full healing. There is no full recovery, but there can be recovery. It does take time. It takes courage, and it takes the support of the Canadian people and the government.
Raymond de Souza, we live in a Western-style country that, when it sees a problem, tends to appoint a commission and write a study. And we do that for a lot of different issues, and we've done it many, many times on this issue as well. In your view, can we make progress taking that approach?
Well, on the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, you're right, it's one of several commissions. In terms of practical steps, when you go through the recommendations, there's a lot to be done. But I think unusually for government commissions, the Truth and Reconciliation Commission actually did change in a significant way how things are discussed and talked about. The sesquicentennial of the country in 2017, was quite a bit different. Public ceremonies around the country are different. The namings of buildings at my university, Queen's University, you had a program about the Sir John A. Macdonald Law School. So actually, I think that the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, in terms of practical steps of improved livelihoods for Indigenous Canadians, may be lacking, as has been pointed out. But in terms of changing the conversation and how people think about Canada's history, it's had actually, I would say, quite an unusually large impact for a government report.
We've returned to this subject many times on this program, and I just want to play a half a minute of a clip from a program we did last year. This is York University professor Susan Dion weighing in on this issue. Sheldon, the clip, if you would.
What I want Canadians to do is take responsibility, to know that their privilege comes at a cost to Indigenous people. And this, I think, is the critical point. The Canadians don't want to recognize that the benefits that they have, the very land that they live on, the resources that are the wealth of this nation come at a cost to Indigenous people.
Jennifer Dockstader, if we took that view, if we took that approach, would we be better off?
I believe that it would, because it takes the average Canadian to actually recognize that, not shy away from uncomfortable conversations because of guilt or shame or even calling things lies. The reason that we do land acknowledgements is to remind Canadians of privilege. It's also an affirming statement for who we are as Indigenous people. So there's many things, and the recognition that it's not my responsibility to help Canada heal. Of course, I'm going to help in any way that I can, but I have my own family and my own life and my own community that I need to work with. And actually giving me the resources to repair what has been lost, the loss of language. At the Friendship Center here, we're offering 4 different languages on a regular basis, and we get people from all over North America coming in on Zoom to relearn their own Indigenous languages. And some of the messages we're getting around that is that's the first time they've heard their languages. But seriously, the ones that touch me the most are the residential school survivors, who for the first time feel safe to actually speak their language and learn their language without shame or guilt or fear. And that's a reality that I don't think the average Canadian understands about what us as Indigenous people are actually going through. At the same time that we're having these philosophical debates about what's the best way to do and what policies to face, we still have the Mi'kmaq fishermen who are attacked violently. We have 1492 land back lane that is actually treaty land in question from developers. And it's going to take a whole of Canada approach to actually almost, on the one hand, reconcile that Canada is not who they believe that they are, while at the same time supporting us to do what we need to do to heal. And of course, resourcing it appropriately. I can't stress that enough. Stop talking about the tax dollars you pay and stop assuming that I don't pay taxes. I absolutely do. And let's start talking about repairing relationships, making relationships honest. So there's a lot of work to be done, and it's going to take past my generation. I'm committed to trying to help as much as I possibly can. But that's also to understand that it is my grandparents that were in residential school and my family that has been impacted by multi-generational trauma. And I'm working in a community that is still being torn apart by all sorts of systemic racism, racism within towns and cities, children that are being removed. Unfortunately, the atrocities don't stop just because you've finish writing a report, and some people are remembering to do land acknowledgements.
John Moscowitz, as we saw in that clip, you were on that program. I'm kind of curious to know what you were thinking as Susan Dion said that, and what your views are on it today.
I think I was both naive and wrong at that point. And I assumed that it wasn't my problem. And that program woke me up to a degree, and I've done some reading and some learning. And I do understand in a way that I didn't quite at that moment, that the responsibility is that of all Canadians, driven obviously by First Nations, supported deeply by the government, but has to be supported by all of us.
Raymond de Souza, you heard what Susan Dion had to say. What do you think?
Well, I think there's 2 ways to understand it. The first way is to say, well, look, that there are the Indigenous peoples of this country are not participating fully now or in the past in the prosperity, in the freedoms of this country which draw people from all over the world. And if that's the case, I think you'd have a widespread consensus and support for, if you want to say, including in a better way the indigenous peoples of the country and the prosperity of the country. The other way of interpreting that, which I think would get less support, is, especially from, say, immigrants in the last 30 or 40 years, is an implication that their success in the country is ill-gotten somehow, or has come at the expense of Indigenous Canadians. Now, you can interpret what you said in two different ways. I think on the first interpretation, you'd find actually quite widespread support. On the second, I think you would find more reluctance to endorse that point of view.
I do want Jennifer to have a chance to speak to that, but before we do that, Rabbi John, I want to just come back to you for a second, because I got to say, we don't have too many people who come on this program and say, I've thought about this issue since I was last here, and I may not have been right last time. I may need to reevaluate my position. That's rare. What brought you to that?
Thinking about it, the experience of being on your show a year ago, whenever it was, and realizing the huge gap between the experience of First Nations peoples and my own. I sometimes recoil when I hear that I am, or Jews are, people of privilege, but it's true. There are people of privilege and there are people of less privilege. We have a responsibility to one another.
Okay, Jennifer Dockstader, can I get you now to respond to part of what Father de Souza had to say, in as much as it sounds as if he's saying, if you're a new immigrant to Canada and you've only been here for a matter of years, it's really not fair to require you to carry the can for the sins of 100 years ago. Is that fair to say?
No, absolutely not. Immigrants choose to come to Canada for a variety of reasons. One, to attain what the privileged in Canada actually already have achieved in some sort of material wealth. Others come from because they have to flee their own countries and come to a land of safety. And no matter how you look at it, and there's many reasons why immigrants come, the point is that they have a choice. This is our land. We have been here since the beginning of time. And there isn't a matter of choice. There's nowhere that we could go to immigrate to escape violence. The only thing that we can continue to do is work with this existing colonial government and help them to realize their own humanity. And I really appreciate what the rabbi said in terms of privilege. I'm coming to you, I'm an Indigenous person of privilege. This is the reason why. Because I'm on a TV show and I'm able to use my voice and my title to have conversations like this.
But let me jump in. Jennifer, forgive me.
Paying job.
Let me jump in for a second, because I think we need a better understanding of why somebody who may have been living in poverty, let's say in some very poor country halfway around the world, who gets to Canada last week, and suddenly all of the issues around colonialism are thrust on that person's shoulders and they're responsible for that as well? Are we saying that? Because
they chose to come here. And when you choose to adopt a country, you choose to adopt its history and its problems. And you don't get to opt out of what you don't like in favor of what you do like. In other words, we're expecting some level of emotional maturity of human beings, which we, as the Haudenosaunee, would call a good mind. We don't get to opt out of the bad things just to say, well, that doesn't involve me. Because guess what? We're on this land together, and we do have a responsibility toward one another.
Okay, let me get Raymond de Souza to respond to that.
Well, my first point there was simply is what people actually might think. I would say that, the experience of people in this country who come here because they think it's a good country, they think it's a fair country, they think it's a just country, they think it's a prosperous country. When they arrive here and then are told that it's not a fair and just country, I think generally speaking, they are open to hearing other stories. But you can't persuade them or that somehow they made a choice to come and perpetrate or participate in an evil. That's not how they came here. That's not how they thought about coming here. So I think you can invite people to understand what took place before they arrived. And that applies to people who've been in the country for many decades as well, to learn the history of the country. But I think we're touching upon something here that's quite important, is that most people who have come to Canada would have come here because they have a generally favorable view of the liberty, justice, freedom, prosperity of this country. The Truth and Reconciliation Commission told a different story. And you have to have both of those stories, if you're going to have reconciliation, sort of be talking to one another. And you're not going to persuade many people that the country is fundamentally and completely a wicked enterprise if they chose to come here, right? At the same time, if you have people come here and say, I'm not interested in any other stories other than my own or the history of my own people in this land, you're not going to have reconciliation either. So you need both stories, I would suggest, to speak to one another. It's not an easy conversation, though, I would agree.
Let me follow up with Rabbi John on that one, which is, I presume you've been to Germany at some point in your life relatively recently. Yes, Rabbi?
Yes.
Okay, and I don't know this, but I'm presuming that you, like many others, think that the job that Germany has done in reconciling its appalling Nazi past is pretty good. At least I've heard that from many people who've gone to Germany. Is that fair to say as well?
Well, it is. Berlin is a remarkable place. And the first time I was there, which is about 20 years ago, I was stunned by what I saw. Because rather than pretending away the past, rather than pretending that nothing happened, what you have right in the center of Germany, they kept alive pre-Weimar Germany, Weimar Germany, Nazi Germany, especially communist Germany, and contemporary Berlin and Germany. That's a remarkable and sophisticated approach, and it's a paradigm that I think every country should copy.
So let me ask the follow-up. With that knowledge that you have in place, how well do you think Canada has done to reconcile its past with Indigenous people compared to what you've seen in Germany?
I don't think you can fully reconcile the past. And by the way, there's no such thing as full recovery. There's no such thing as full healing. But there have to be strong attempts at it, and you can recover significantly. I don't think you can do it without, and I don't think land acknowledgements does it. I think a people has to have a land, especially people that has had the land previously. You don't recover from loss of a land without recovering the land itself, or at least part of it. So I think that's a crucial part of this story, that unless the government is prepared to cede more significant land to First Nations, this will continue to be a trauma, not just for the Indigenous peoples, but also for all of Canada.
Jennifer Dockstader, a tough question, and sad to say, we only have 30 seconds left for you to answer it. So give it your best shot here. We had a guest earlier in the program who said reconciliation is dead. A young 32-year-old woman said reconciliation is dead. Do you agree?
Unfortunately, I do. And here's why. I think that the average Canadian has let it die. And that these arguments, and with all due respect to the father, I think that he needs to do the reading that the rabbi has done, actually, and do some introspection and some reflection, actually, on his views, because he speaks like a man of privilege, a man who has enjoyed the benefits of colonialism. Try talking to Indigenous people about what the real life everyday experience is, and that is very different from yours, Father. And I don't mean to be hostile. I don't mean to be hostile and blaming, but what I am saying is that these conversations are important because they're uncomfortable. And off air, I'd love to have you call me, Father, and you and I can have a conversation about my experience and yours and come to a point of humanity. Ultimately, I think that is the overarching issue that allows trauma to continue in any people, amongst any culture. And that is we cease to see each other as human beings.
Jennifer, forgive me, I've got to jump in and journalistic Journalistically, I've got to give the Father a chance to respond to that. Go ahead, Father.
Well, I don't know why that other guest said reconciliation is dead, but reconciliation requires a difficult conversations to be had. And I think, well, in Jennifer's response, I'm sorry to say that it's a bit patronizing and it is hostile. And that is why reconciliation is more difficult than maybe we think. And I would hate to say it's dead, but that particular approach isn't very fruitful.
We need more time, and we need you three back to continue this conversation, which needs to go, which needs much more time to continue. But I'm grateful that we got it started
Interesting that
tonight.
you talk about being patronizing, Father. Perhaps you should roll back the tape from this tonight, and then we'll talk about patronizing. Have a good day, everybody, and thank you both for coming and having this conversation.
Thanks to the three of you for joining us tonight.
Most welcome. Thank you, Steve.
The Agenda with Steve Paikin is brought to you by the Chartered Professional Accountants of Ontario. CPA Ontario is a regulator, an educator, a thought leader, and an advocate. We protect the public. We advance our profession. We guide our CPAs. We are CPA Ontario. And by viewers like you. Thank you.